It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our closing keynote speaker for today. First concerned in 2017 by the U.S. Senate as the 7th Administrator of the Transportation Security Administration, Acting Administrator David Pekoske was nominated in May to serve a second term as Administrator. Second term. He leads a workforce of more than 60,000 employees and is responsible for security operations at nearly 440 U.S. airports. Before joining the TSA, Acting Administrator Pekoske was an executive in the government services industry where he provided counterterrorism, security, and intelligence support services to government agencies. In addition, he served as the 26th Vice Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard. I address him as Admiral, not as Mr. Administrator. Thank you. As a Marine. Acting Administrator Pekoske has maintained an open dialogue with ALPA, and we've met several times to discuss many different issues on how best to deliver our shared commitment to advancing aviation security. Our union provided to the TSA, for instance, recent examples of pilot screening experiences based on data submitted by ALPA's pilots. Together, ALPA and TSA use the information to identify how to maximize the efficiency of known crew member. Very important program. KCM is a joint initiative between Airlines for America and ALPA that allows TSA officers to use an enhanced screening process to verify crew members' identity and employment status. Admiral Pekoske has also sought out and listened to ALPA's line pilot perspective on other aviation security issues as well. We have discussed improving the security of the flight deck by providing additional funding support for the Federal Flight Deck Officer Program that will end the training backlog and establish a full-time, recurrent training facility. So please, a warm welcome for Transportation Security Administrator, Acting Administrator David Pekoske. Thank you. Thank you, David.
I appreciate it. Thanks. Well, thank you, Captain Pete, for the great introduction, and good afternoon, soon to be good evening to all of you. It's really great to be here with partners in aviation security, and I was really privileged to hear the tail end of the last panel. I do think that it is a great tie-in to some of the things that I thought would be good to talk with you about this afternoon. But before I do, I'd also like to recognize Captain Wolfgang Koch, who has been a member of our Aviation Security Advisory Council for many years. Just a terrific part of that council. That council is very valuable to me as the administrator. They give me candid advice on issues that we're currently facing, some things that we may or may not be working in TSA that can put it on the plate for us. And we also turn over to the Aviation Security Advisory Committee a lot of things that we're thinking, and they're in very much the developmental stage, that we just like a steer and would like their input from. And Wolfgang has been a key member of that group, and I really appreciate his volunteer service there and ALPA making him available. And it really coincides very well with his role here in ALPA. I'd also like to recognize Director Terry Stevenson, who you met just a few minutes ago, our relatively new director of the Federal Air Marshal Service, but not new to the Federal Air Marshal Service itself. A very seasoned FAM, and I'm very glad to have Terry in that role. We've got a lot of things that we're working on. We mentioned the roadmap. I'll mention it again in my remarks. But what we're trying to do is to become ever more effective in what we do to provide for security in the transportation system overall, but the key focus clearly for the Federal Air Marshal Service is on aviation security. The theme that you have for this conference is perseverance through strength and unity, and that can have many meanings to it, and certainly from the way I interpret it, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we would not be able to do the work that we do in TSA were it not for pilots and first officers working very closely with us. Nor would we want to do the work we do without that. Same goes for flight attendants, and same goes for the owners and operators of the systems. And one of the things that, as I look back on the past 5 years in TSA, that I think is a real strength of the organization is that we do have not just partnerships where we know each other when we get together on occasion, but we have partnerships where we can share information in a trusted manner, get very candid feedback, and know that when it gets down to the operations, that we're going to be shoulder to shoulder working together. And this is a very poignant discussion to have today because we remembered 9/11 in the 21st anniversary of 9/11 just a few days ago. And certainly for TSA, that date was so critical because that was the impetus to establish this agency. And you might remember that 69 days after 9/11, Congress passed a law that established the Transportation Security Administration, and President George W. Bush signed that law at Reagan National Airport, and we've held many ceremonies in the very spot that he signed. And in fact, we celebrated our 20th anniversary in the very location where he signed that law. That law is largely untouched now, almost 21 years later. That's really important. And one of the things that I focus on a lot is we have some very, very significant authorities within TSA to make sure the transportation system remains secure. Embedded in those authorities is the demand on the part of the American public that we remain as an agile agency, that we're able to act very quickly, and that we are a different government agency than some of the other government agencies might be that have been around for decades or even centuries. And so what I always look at in the role that I have is how can I make sure, first and foremost, that we exercise those authorities when we need to. Secondly, that we exercise those authorities with great responsibility. And embedded in that is the responsibility to coordinate fully as we exercise those authorities. And then how can I make sure that we retain them? Because as we face issues in the future, it's going to be really important that we have that authority set in place. I'll give you a very real example that's been playing out over the past year plus, and that is began on the surface transportation security side, but will soon be in place on the aviation side, both airlines and airports, is cybersecurity. We are increasingly vulnerable from a cybersecurity perspective and want to urgently, for reasons that you see playing out in the news each and every day with respect to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Chinese threats to Taiwan. We want to make sure that the critical infrastructure in this country is cyber resilient. And we've used the authorities that we have to make the transportation sector among the most, if not the most, resilient from a cyber perspective across all critical infrastructure sectors in the country, all 16 of them. So what I'd like to talk about today is I'll give you kind of an outline, some topics that I want to touch on, and then I'll have more to say about each one. And the first one will be in-flight incidences. The second is crew member self-defense. The third is the FAMS roadmap. Fourth is the FFDO program. The fifth is international harmonization, which was one of the questions that was asked. Next is one-stop security, and then I'll wrap up with the known crew member program. So let me talk about in-flight incidences first. When the mask mandate was in place, there was a definite uptick in the number of in-flight incidences that involved assaults. There's certainly an uptake in instances where there was a verbal exchange between a flight attendant generally and a passenger. But what we focused on were the cases where there was actual physical contact between two passengers or between a passenger or two and a flight attendant. And we've tracked the number of these incidents since since July of 2021. And our hypothesis was that as we looked at each one of these cases, that they, contrary to what you might assume by reading the media coverage of this situation, they were not related to mask wear when it involved assault. They were generally related to substance abuse or just overall anxiety. And so as I look at the threat today of insider and in-flight instances, it remains a concern. I mean, the numbers are not substantially different today than they were in July of 2021. And so what we've done across the interagency is wanted to make sure that between the FAA, which has the regulatory authority for a passenger who is not following the directions of a crew member, between FAA, TSA, and the FBI, who has the investigative authority, to make sure we had a coordinated and concerted approach to this that included fines, certainly from the FAA perspective. From our perspective, we have the authority, if somebody is a pre-check passenger or a trusted traveler, like a global entry passenger, that we can revoke that trusted traveler status based on a review of the specifics of the case, and we've done that in many cases. And then in those that warrant it, if it warrants a criminal prosecution, working with the FBI and working with U.S. attorneys to pursue that criminal prosecution, because we want to put penalties in place as a deterrent for others who might be contemplating creating a situation on board an aircraft in flight. There was a recent case that we just read about in the news over the course of the last day or so, of a person who was sentenced to 4 months in prison and I believe a couple, 3 years of probation afterwards for getting into a physical altercation with another passenger. And this caused the flight to divert. It was going from Dallas to LA, had to divert to Phoenix. So impacted certainly the anxiety level of a lot of passengers, and then certainly the time for all those passengers. And then just today, we had a flight that was going from Boston to San Juan, and the pilot determined that all passengers needed to be deplaned and rescreened based on a passenger who was creating a situation and using language that caused the pilot to be concerned. And so we did exactly that. We took all the passengers off the plane, had them all go back through screening, and used canines to screen the aircraft. So significant delay on the part of the passengers. Absolutely the right decision on the part of the pilot. Whenever in doubt, we should always do that. But those are just two cases. One, an adjudication of a case that occurred several months ago, and the second one is just a real live example today that in-flight incidences are still occurring, and we do need to keep our focus on this. I think largely people may have moved past it. We have not, because it's still showing up nearly every day in our data. The crew member self-defense training that we provide, we provided training to about 4,600 people over the last year in crew member self-defense. And what we used to do is we used to provide this training by asking crew members to come to our Federal Air Marshal field offices to receive the training. We've changed that up, and we've worked arrangements with some of the carriers where we go right to their training facilities and do the training there. And we also have a mobile training capability, which I think will be very effective at getting more people to take this self-defense training, which I think is critically important. Terry mentioned the FAMS roadmap. The FAMS roadmap that will be signed very shortly represents kind of a maturation in our process of looking how to best employ the significant capability of the Federal Air Marshal Service. And one of the changes we made back in 2018 was we decided that it was better and better security for us to make sure that we had Federal Air Marshals on board the flights where we had a concern with passengers that might be on board the flights. We might have conducted additional screening in a checkpoint. We might not have found anything in that additional screening, but this passenger was designated for enhanced screening. We wanted to make sure that, given that we had a concern about the passenger for a lot of very, very good reasons, which I won't go into here, that we made sure that we had that security continuity aboard the aircraft. And so it caused us to reprioritize how we deployed Federal Air Marshals, and then within the aircraft where we seated those Air Marshals. In the past, Air Marshals were generally seated forward. We still seat Air Marshals forward, but not all of them, because we want to make sure that they're nearby the passenger, not right next to, but nearby the passenger that we might have a concern over. I think this program has worked really well over the 2.5, 3 years it's been in place. And so as we looked at that, we decided that it would be a good idea to further define the role of the Federal Air Marshals and to emphasize their preventative role and to ensure that we had very, very strong relationships with all of the Joint Terrorism Task Forces and with law enforcement entities within airports. And so you will see us kind of rebalancing FAM scheduling and rebalancing FAM assignments. The other thing that I would mention to you is, and I know you'll all appreciate this, you mentioned that we were at 20 years and 20 years in the FFDO program. Some of these federal air marshals have been flying on federal air marshals missions for 20 years. And that is not, in my view, the best way, given that we have other options to manage that force, because you really provide few career options when you do that. And from a physical perspective, it's hard to do if you have, let's say 3 flights in a given day. So we were trying to balance force management issues as well as looking at our very good risk information and ensuring that we placed resources where we saw the greatest risks. So that roadmap will be published soon. The FFDO program is included in the roadmap. I think it's critically important because those programs are very complementary to one another. And we will implement that roadmap in phases. It won't all be implemented all at once. It's not possible for us to do that. We need to phase it. So you'll see us phasing the implementation over the next couple of years. On the FFDO program, I'm a huge fan of the FFDO program. I think it's a fantastic program. I really appreciate all of the pilots and first officers who have raised their hands to volunteer, to get the initial training, to get the recurrent training, to get the qualification training that's required in the program. And I want to see us continue to develop this program. We know that over the course of the pandemic, we took a reduction in numbers just based on the reality of pilots that might no longer be flying as a result of the pandemic and our ability to train. But we are getting back on track. The good news with the number of people we have in the pool that want to become federal flight deck officers, it's robust. And it's kind of a nice position to be in a lot of ways, to have literally thousands of people that want to join that program. So it shows there's keen interest, and there's a lot of patriots out there who want to make sure that they do even more to ensure that the passengers on their flights and the people below are secure. So you will see us continue to emphasize investment in the Federal Air Marshal in the FFDO program. And we talked about initial training, and I know the topic came up about Artesia versus other opportunities. We are looking at other opportunities. Whenever you are a tenant of another organization, you lose a little bit of flexibility when that happens. And if we have some other options that will give us some more flexibility to conduct our mission, I want to explore those. As Terry mentioned, that has a price tag to it. And our budget is about $10 billion. It's a lot of money. But you got to figure that 2/3 of every dollar that we receive in the budget goes to costs for our workforce, necessarily so. We have a very large 60,000 person workforce. And so the support we get in the budget will help us enable further development of the FFDO program along the lines that you've talked about and that I just mentioned. The other thing is the recurrent training at the 3 locations, and then our qualification training now in 37 locations around the country. So we've got a pretty good footprint. I want to take full advantage of the footprint. I want to develop the organic capability of the agency to support the FFDO program. And just know that from my perspective, and as Captain DePete mentioned, I've been nominated for another 5 years. So if confirmed by the Senate, that will be the perspective that we carry forward, is that I think this is a program that has been incredibly effective. I'm not so much worried about the efficiency piece because I think it's so effective, but I want to continue to place emphasis on the FFDO program. And Terry mentioned, he had the number exactly right, 20,500,000 missions completed since 2003 as you approach your 20th anniversary. So I really congratulate you on that. International harmonization, that's a no-brainer for me. We should do it. And we renegotiate FAMS agreements on a regular basis. We also work with countries on things like visa waiver program applications. And whenever we see that opportunity where a country wants to negotiate with us on something they want, I want to put international harmonization for FFDOs into that conversation. It's operationally advantageous for us to do that. And the logic is really simple. I mean, if we can work it with federal law enforcement officers, we should be able to work it with federal flight deck officers who are trained and certified by us and performing a mission on our behalf. So we will place additional emphasis on that topic. Two other quick things. One is on one-stop security. We are strong advocates for one-stop security. One-stop security basically means if you are flying internationally, and let's say you're flying inbound to the United States, you leave Heathrow, you land in JFK, and you have a follow-on to Charlotte, that when you leave Heathrow, you don't get rescreened at JFK because the Heathrow screening is considered to be equivalent from a performance effect basis to U.S. screening. We've done a lot of work on this, and I like this program for the key reason that it enhances security. A lot of people think that, hey, this one-stop program is really designed to provide more convenience. It does that, but from my perspective and my drive on it is it improves security of people leaving last point of departure airports where we have agreements for one-stop security inbound to the United States. A couple of aspects of one-stop security that I would highlight for you. One is that for the locations that we're working with right now, which I won't disclose here because we're still kind of working back and forth, but part of the idea is that we harmonize technology so that we can exchange data quickly in real time between the two countries. So let's say, for example, we have a passenger, let's use a checked baggage example. The passenger checks a bag. Our partners internationally clear that bag, but we have some concerns about that passenger for different reasons. We can in real time pull that image up and review it from here. And if we have any concerns, either it doesn't load on the plane and that passenger doesn't fly, or we're okay with it loading on the plane, but we will further search that bag when it gets into the United States. So there's a big technology piece of this. The other part from a technology basis is it will allow us to raise the standards of technology around the world. It's one thing to see an X-ray machine, for example, in a checkpoint. And if you look at an X-ray machine and it has a company's brand on it, and you're in one country, and you come back to the United States and you see that company's brand on the same X-ray machine here in this country, that does not mean that the machine has the same detection capability, because a lot of this is built into, of course, into the software algorithms that are in those machines. And so what we're advancing along with OneStop is moving to an open architecture system where when we buy major pieces of security technology, we're going to buy the machine itself and the operating system for the machine, but unlikely to buy the software that detects what we want to detect. The reason for this, to separate them off, is right now, if we want to make an adjustment to software in any of our technologies in the checkpoint, we have to go back to the original equipment manufacturer and have them make the update. There are sometimes only two. And so the competition between just two is not very robust. Plus, we'd really like to get away from asking passengers to do things which introduces error rates into automatically detecting certain things that we're concerned about. A good example is, you remember a couple of years ago, we became more concerned. We always were concerned, but we became more concerned with powders and the potential for mixing powders with liquids and creating a gas reaction. So the remedy, because we couldn't detect some of the powders in our X-ray technology, we could detect some, but we couldn't necessarily characterize it, was to have passengers take those powders out of their bags. And so that's a manual process where a technology solution could come in place. I'd rather be in the spot where I can go out into the market and say, hey, here's an RFP, a request for a proposal. I need proposals back in 90 days to be able to solve this particular problem, and simply layer that solution on top of the other solutions that we already have in our software stack. So there's a big part of harmonizing and improving the technology performance across the countries that participate in this one-stop process. The other one is, as you all know, we do a pretty high level of double-blind red team testing in our system. We do that because we want to find where our vulnerabilities are ourselves and to be able to close those vulnerabilities as quickly as we can. There are very few organizations around the world that do red team testing at all, or double-blind red team testing. And so built into the notion that, hey, we have to have equivalent security outcomes with our partner airports that are going to participate in this program, is that they participate in joint double-blind red team testing, which means that the red team testing will be done with a joint team of U.S. testers and pick another country, their testers. We've already done some of this, and we've learned, you learn a lot because different people and people from different cultures have different perspectives on things. And so this has already provided a pretty good benefit to us even before One Stop starts. So One Stop Security, going outbound from the United States to other countries, does not require any change in law. But inbound One Stop does, because there is a federal law that requires that a U.S. federal officer screen passengers for domestic travel in the United States. And so what we've asked the Congress to consider on a prototype basis is give us the authority to prototype One Stop. We'll come up and we'll brief and make sure that as people oversee this process from a prototype basis, that it's operating as we had advertised and how we intend it to operate. And I'm sure we're going to learn quite a bit as we do the prototype. So we have proposals up on the Hill to do limited prototypes for One Stop testing inbound to the United States. And gotten a lot of support on that, and I expect that it will come in some bill over the course of the next several months. But I just ask you for your support because it does provide better security for inbound U.S. flights. The security is commensurate. We are required by law to make sure that's the case. And it will allow us to improve, I think, security globally, particularly with our closest partners. So I think it's a really good program. And the other thing to mention to you is the known crew member program. And just know that I support the known crew member program. I want to see the known crew member program get better and to continue. You are, by the nature of the process you went through to be in the positions you're in and the work you perform every single day, a key part of our security process. And I want to make sure that we recognize that in providing facilitation for your movement in airports. The challenge we have with known crew member is we have had an increasing level of violations of the tenets of the program. For example, known crew members bringing firearms through the KCM checkpoint because we pick that up when we do random checks either at the gate or just random at the KCM portal into the regular checkpoint. We have seen known crew members on international travel use the known crew member portal, which you cannot do. And the other thing is we've seen known crew members take someone else's carry-on bag and bring it through the KCM lane. So what we've done is, as you know, in pretty much every part of our security system and our screening system, there's a random selection rate. And I know a lot of people, it's happened to me too, is why do they get randomly selected twice in a row? But it happens. The idea, though, is that and it's a random number generator, so it's not decided by a human, that we detect these things in a random rate. What we've had to do over the past couple of years is increase that random rate. There is a technology solution to all of this, and we're working very hard to get that technology solution in place. As you know, in our screening checkpoints, we have a technology called the credential authentication technology, which will become completely biometric in the not-too-distant future, where you show up, your facial image is captured with some pretty highly developed camera systems with the right lighting, and we find that this has an error rate that's almost zero. So it's really advanced quite a bit over the last 5 years, that we can use facial recognition or at least a credential that can be verified by the technology and can provide your access through the known crew member portal. And a part of this is going to be just, and I would ask all of you to emphasize to all of your colleagues, hey, this is a great program. It really facilitates our movement in airports. It's appropriate that this program be in place, but we need to make sure that we're following the rules of the program. I'm hoping that once we get some technology solutions in place and with this increased random selection rate, that we will eventually bring the number of people that we're seeing with violations of the system parameters come down, but we're not. I mean, we increased the known rate, and actually the number of violations we saw went up. So, but that's a fairly short period of data analysis, not long enough to really make a definitive conclusion. So in closing, just know that I greatly appreciate what all of you do as an American, as somebody who's on board flights every day, as somebody who's under flights every day, and I appreciate the partnership that ALPA has provided to TSA. I commit to you, as I've done for the past 5 years, I will always listen to what you say. I will always be accessible to you for any concerns. And I think we've built. My goal is not just to have relationships, but to have relationships based on trust, where we can say things to each other that we might not necessarily want to hear, but we know in our heart of hearts, hey, it's probably true, and let's figure out a solution to this. Because my job is to make sure that the transportation system remains secure. We have the best system in the entire world. We have the biggest FFDO program in the entire world. We have the best pilots and first officers in the entire world. And so it's a real privilege for me to work alongside you, and I really thank you for your time this afternoon. Thanks, Joe.